If you're using the strict policies, essentially what you're doing is you're discouraging people to book very far in advance. And that's exactly not what you want. Because if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that maximizing revenue is all about pacing. It's all about leveraging the entire booking window. Airbnb did a study, and it turns out that 44% of guests say that free cancellation is one of their top needs when choosing a place to stay. Flexible does not offer you pretty much any protection, but it will increase your bookings quite significantly. And we have seen a pretty significant impact on bookings when you loosen up your cancellation policy.
Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Get Paid for Your Pad. It's Monday, so we're doing an episode of Rev Up where we give you insights on our revenue management strategies and how you can maximize revenue for your short-term rental listings. The topic for today is cancellation policies. You might think, what does that have to do with pricing and revenue management? Well, the way that we view revenue management is a little bit more holistic than maybe some other companies define it. We really think of revenue management as everything that is somehow related to driving bookings. Now, you might argue everything is related to driving bookings, right? Marketing, distribution, operations. In the end, everything you do in the business indirectly affects revenue, which is true. But, this is kind of where we draw the line, is anything that has to do with pricing or availability, like minimum night stay settings or booking settings. That's what we really consider the core parts of the revenue management strategy, as well as booking channels, so distribution and different discounts on the different OTAs as well. So that's really what we focus on as part of our service. So today I want to talk about cancellation policies. It's actually a pretty important topic because cancellation policies can significantly impact your bookings. And we've seen this quite a lot because we have clients with all sorts of cancellation policies, and we've changed a lot of the policies, and we've seen the effect that it can have, especially if you go from a very restrictive cancellation policy to a much more flexible cancellation policies. You often see like a pretty big spike in bookings right when you change those policies. So today I'm going to walk you through every single policy. There's been some changes. I'm going to focus on Airbnb, by the way, for this episode. I'll probably talk about other channels and how you can keep your cancellation policies congruent over the different channels, and if there's any reason to maybe have a different cancellation policy on different channels, right? So direct, booking.com, VRBO, Airbnb, should we have the same policy, or could we maybe have a different policy on the different channels? Now, Airbnb made some changes pretty recently. It used to be the case that there was a strict policy, and then there was a firm policy, a moderate policy, and a flexible policy. Okay, even if you go even further back, I think it was only strict, moderate, and flexible. Now, the strict policy is no longer available. Airbnb has phased out that policy, and so it's possible if you had any listings, I think they made the change on October 25th, if I'm not mistaken. So before that, you were still able to choose the strict policy. If you had strict policies on your listings and you didn't change it, they'll still be there. So there you might have some listings that are still strict. But for new listings, you can't choose the strict policy anymore. The policy that you can choose are called Super Strict 30 and Super Strict 60. Now, I'm going to start with those. So Super Strict 60 essentially means that for the guest to get a full refund, they can only get a full refund if they cancel within 24 hours of booking. And this is a rule that Airbnb has across the board. There's some exceptions in some different countries maybe, but just like how airlines have the rule that if you book a ticket and you make a mistake, you can cancel it within 24 hours, always, regardless of the cancellation policy. So that's the case for Airbnb as well. So at any point in time, whatever your cancellation policy is, if somebody books it and cancels within 24 hours, they get a full refund. For the strict policies, that is is the only way to get a full refund. And that's why strict policies, I highly do not recommend that you use these. There's a reason that Airbnb phased out the strict policy. And it's because, think about it, like imagine you put yourself in the shoes of a guest. Let's say you book a listing 5 months in advance, 6 months in advance, 7 months in advance, a year in advance. After that 24-hour window passes, you are no longer able to get a full refund. So when you book that far in advance, obviously like life happens, things can change, things can get in the way. If you have to cancel, there's no way that you can get a full refund, right? So that's kind of crazy. That's really restrictive, right? Because think about it. If you book like half a year in advance and the 24-hour period is over, you're locked in for at least half of the amount that you paid. So what's going to happen if you cancel after 24 hours? You only get a 50% refund on the strict policies. And then strict 60 days, if it's within 60 days of check-in, you get a 0 refund. And for strict 30 days, if you cancel within 30 days, you get 0 refunds. So if you're using the strict policies, essentially what you're doing is you're discouraging people to book very far in advance. Because if somebody books 5 days in advance, it doesn't really matter if you have strict or firm or limited, because they're not going to get a refund when they cancel anyway. So essentially what the strict policy does is it just discourages people to book very far in advance. And that's exactly not what you want. Because if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that maximizing revenue is all about pacing. It's all about leveraging the entire booking window. And so if you're restricting the early booking window, the early part of the booking window, if you're restricting that by putting a strict cancellation policy, then essentially you're going to lose out on a lot of bookings that happen far out because people don't want to lock in big purchases that far in advance. So essentially, you're going to be relying more on the later part of the booking window. And that's exactly what you don't want to do because, as we all know, prices that you can get later in the booking window are generally lower than the prices that you can charge early in the booking window. So essentially, strict policies, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. So I highly recommend, if you have any listings that are on strict, change it right now. Airbnb will hurt your visibility. They will give you less visibility. Like guests don't like strict cancellation policies, and so your visibility will be significantly impacted if you're using the strict cancellation policy. So that's just a no-go. I can't really think of any situations where you would use it. All right, so let's move up to the next strictest cancellation policy, which is called firm. So for the firm cancellation policy, guests can cancel within 24 hours for a full refund, like every other cancellation policy. But then if they want a full refund, they have to cancel at least 30 days in advance. So that basically means that if I book a unit, let's say 6 months in advance, let's say I book for the summer, right? A lot of people right now are already looking for the summer next year. If I book it for the summer and I book it for July 1st, I can cancel it for free or with a full refund until June 1st. So that gives me quite a lot of security. So there's a pretty big jump from strict to firm, right? Because that feels pretty reasonable. If something happens, I can still cancel it. But if I cancel it less than 30 days before check-in, I will receive a 50% refund. And if I cancel it within 7 days of arrival, I will get no refund at all. So from a guest perspective, that feels like a pretty reasonable cancellation policy. So I think that will help you. The firm policy will definitely allow for bookings that are really far out. If you book like 3, 4, 5, 6 months in advance, it's a pretty reasonable. You have a lot of time still to cancel penalty free. Now, the period where firm will hurt you a little bit is that period between 30 days and 2 weeks out. Let's say I booked 29 days out. I cannot get a full refund anymore, right? So if I book for 4 weeks in advance, under the firm policy, I'm not going to get any refund if something happens, right? Now, obviously, the time period that something could happen is much smaller, but still, if I book if I book 29 days in advance and I can choose between somebody who has a limited policy, which is full refund if you cancel more than 2 weeks out, and a firm cancellation policy where I'm immediately locked in, right? Again, if I book less than a month out for firm, I am locked in the moment that the 24-hour free cancellation window closes. So it kind of feels like the moment I book, I'm locked in. I think there's a little bit of resistance there for anybody who makes bookings because it feels like, the moment you press the button, then you're kind of locked in at least for half of the amount, unless you cancel within 24 hours. But, it feels nice to have a little bit of room from the time of booking until you're locked in for part of the booking value, right? So I think between 30 days and 14 days out, the firm cancellation will hurt your booking. So you get relatively fewer bookings in that 2-week time period. Now, moving up to the limited cancellation policy. So this is a new policy. This was introduced, I don't know, like a month ago or something. I think at the same time when they introduced this 24-hour full refund cancellation policy. So the limited policy is the reason that Airbnb introduced it is because the jump from firm to moderate was huge, right? It went from a full refund, you have to cancel at least a month out, to moderate, where you can get a full refund if you cancel more than 5 days out. So if you cancel 6 days in advance, that's less than a week, you get a full refund. But for firm, it's, you have to cancel more than a month in advance. So that's a really big jump. And so Airbnb listened to feedback from hosts and they introduced a middle ground between firm and moderate, and they called it limited. So for limited, guests can cancel and get a full refund if they cancel at least 2 weeks in advance. Now, if they cancel between 1 week and 2 weeks, they'll get a 50% refund. Moving up to moderate, as I mentioned, more than 5 days out, you're going to get a full refund. And as from the guest perspective, I'm talking, right? If you cancel 5 days in advance, less than 5 days in advance, you get a 50% refund.
What's up, guys? Eric here. And before we dive into this episode, I want to introduce you to our podcast sponsor, Free Wild Foundry. Free Wild Foundry is a revenue management service, white glove, high touch service for the top 1% short-term rental operators. We're currently managing over $60 million in bookings, 1,700 listings worldwide, and we are growing very, very quickly. Our RPM program is a done-for-you revenue management service, and I want to invite you, if you are a short-term rental operator that's doing $1 million or more, or maybe about 15 listings or more, head over to freewildfoundry.com and apply for one of our free revenue audit reports. This is where Jasper and the team will actually take a look at your pricing strategy, audit all of your Airbnb listings, and let you know if you're leaving money on the table. So this is free to everyone who's listening to this podcast. Head over to freewildfoundry.com and apply for your free audit report.
And then the last policy is flexible, where you get a full refund if you cancel at least 1 day before check-in. So the only time where you're not going to get a full refund is essentially if you cancel within 24 hours of the check-in, right? So extremely flexible. And then you can even get a partial refund if you cancel like 10 hours in advance. So flexible, essentially it offers very little or pretty much no protection for hosts. So it's a pretty extreme cancellation policy. And obviously if you get cancellations under the flexible policy, that can really affect your revenue. And we'll talk about like in what type of situations you want to choose these different cancellation policies. But one thing that I will notice is that Airbnb did a study, and it turns out that 44% of guests say that free cancellation is one of their top needs when choosing a place to stay. Okay. And that's why Airbnb decided now to highlight listings with a free cancellation policy. So if you go in the Airbnb search results, you'll notice that, and this is pretty new as well, that it now shows it shows underneath the search snippet, it shows free cancellation, just like on booking.com, where it's shown with a green color to make it stand out. But Airbnb now has that in the search results as well. So yes, flexible does not offer you pretty much any protection, but it will increase your bookings quite significantly. It increases your visibility, it increases conversion, because 44% of guests are looking for that policy. Because obviously for the guest, it's great. It's like, hey, I just booked this Airbnb, something happens, no big deal, I can just cancel it. So now the next question is, what cancellation policy should you choose for your listings? And this really depends on a number of factors. First of all, it depends heavily on your booking window. So for example, let's compare a city with a very short booking window. Like let's say Miami. Miami has a very short booking window. Like most people book in the last 2 weeks, and there's a lot of last minute demand. Also, it's a very competitive market where, you can't really charge a premium necessarily. The amount of room that you have to play with prices when the booking window is that short is very little. The price is not really going to change that much from like 14 days out until last minute. Whereas if you are, let's say, in a market with a very long booking window, let's say you're in a ski resort and people book, for 5-6 months out for their ski holiday, or also if you're in a beach market where people book the summer holidays far in advance, then obviously getting a booking 6 months in advance versus getting it 2 weeks in advance is a major difference in pricing. Those bookings that come in 6 months in advance, like you can really high ADR, but 2 weeks out, that's a different story, especially for larger homes, because larger homes generally have a longer booking window, right? People plan group and family travel. If you're staying with your entire family of like 16 people or something at a 6-bedroom house on the lake in the summer, obviously you're going to plan that a long time in advance. And also those people that book those, they're not very likely to cancel because, they book it so far in advance and there's so many people involved that those bookings generally don't get as many cancellations as people that book for themselves, right? Business travelers that book, the plans can change and it's not a big deal to cancel it. Even if you book for like 2 people, you go on a trip and you decide to, change your plans. When you travel with a big group, oftentimes like those bookings don't tend to get as many cancellations. But anyway, going back to the cancellation policies, here's the challenge with the policies. You can only choose one policy on Airbnb at least. So if you choose a firm cancellation policy, which might be a good option for the high season, if you're on the Great Lakes in the north of the US, in Michigan or Ohio, if you're on the Great Lakes, then firm makes a lot of sense for the high season because, trying to book, especially for the larger homes, trying to book like a 6-bedroom, less than 30 days out for the summer, you'll be able to book it, but you're not going to get the premium prices. So there you do run some risk let's say if you have like a moderate or limited cancellation policy, right? You want to have a little bit more protection for those dates. But in the low season, you kind of want to just get as many bookings as you can. In January, in Michigan or Wisconsin, Canada, unless it's a ski market, you're not going to get a lot of bookings. And so you want to have a very flexible cancellation policy. You'll probably be okay with flexible because, those times of the year, you just want to get as many bookings as possible, as much visibility as possible. Because there's not a lot of people traveling. And so you want to make it as attractive as possible for people to book your unit. But then in the summer, it's a different story. So how do you balance that, right? If you're in a market where the booking window is fairly stable, it makes it a little bit easier. Now, here's some general guidelines. Obviously, this is highly situational, or it's highly dependent on your type of product, the size of your house, the market, the type of clientele that you're attracting. There's so many variables, but I want to give you some general guidelines. Okay, if you're in a highly competitive market with a short booking window, so I'm talking about like a couple weeks, you probably want to go with flexible. The reason for that is that you don't lose that much when people cancel last minute because there's a lot of last minute demand in those cities, and the opportunity that you're losing when somebody cancels last minute is not that great. And at the same time, if you're using a stricter cancellation policy, let's say you're using firm in Miami, most people are booking within 30 days. So that means that most people, when they book, they're locked in after 24 hours. A lot of the competition, because it's a very competitive market, a lot of the competition, especially hotel rooms, often have a flexible cancellation policy where you can cancel a day in advance. If you're using these stricter policies in those markets, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. So the competition is important as well to look at, which is if you're using price labs, you can actually see in the market dashboard, you can actually see what percentage of hosts are using what type of cancellation policy. So there you can get an idea of like what other people are doing, and you can take that into account. So markets with a very short booking window, I would say you want to go for either flexible or moderate. Like anything above that, it's going to hurt your revenue. Next up is, let's say, fairly stable markets where the booking window is a little bit longer, right? So these are like your typical like kind of secondary cities, if you will, maybe like a city like Austin or a city like Kansas City, like not the major cities like Los Angeles, New York, Miami, but the secondary markets that are not highly seasonal. Generally there you want to go for you could still go for flexible for the smaller units, so like the studios and the one beds. The larger homes, you might want to go for either moderate or limit. Now, if you're in a highly seasonal market, like the beach markets, the ski markets, markets, the traditional vacation rental markets, especially in the north of the United States and in Canada as well. And if you're international, it's kind of same thing. The beach markets, ski markets are generally more seasonal than the city markets. But if you are in a very seasonal market, then you kind of have to make a choice where you have to weigh two things against each other. It's like, how much protection do you need for the high season versus how much is the policy going to hurt you in overall? Well, because the policies are going to apply to the entire year, right? So if you choose firm, then that's going to apply for the entire year. Now, for the highly seasonal markets, you do want to have some protection for the high season, unless your high season is crazy. It's like peak season essentially. So we have a few markets. We have a market in Australia, for example, where the peak season is just like 100% booked, and in those circumstances, you can get premium prices last minute. So you don't really need that much protection, right? Because you can still get a really high price last minute. Like, we have a client in Australia, and I was actually just looking at Christmas and New Year, which the market there books out pretty much 100%. And I was just looking on Airbnb as a guest to see like what's still available. And in some areas, literally the only units that are still available are the units that we manage. And we are getting crazy prices. Everything else, and the prices are really high. We're talking about like $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 a night. And so those are really high prices, but we are not lowering our prices because there's not really anything else out there anymore that's available. So we are still getting bookings. It's for Christmas and New Year, so we're getting pretty close. 98% of the market's already booked up, and we still have a bunch of units. And people, every day we see the bookings coming in, people are paying crazy prices. And even last minute, people will pay really high prices because there are a lot of people that are still looking to spend Christmas or New Year or somewhere in that region. If they find something that's available, they'll take it, but otherwise they'll stay at home. So it's like with the airlines where, let's say your Christmas, it's raining, it's cold, and you're like, I want to go to the sun. Let me see if there's a ticket to Mexico, right? And then there's one ticket left, but it's pretty expensive. You might just take it because you just want to get away to the sun, right? So that last man standing strategy, if you're in a market where it's like that, then you don't really need that much protection, because you're going to book at a premium price anyway, even last minute. But most of the high season markets are not like that. You'll have high occupancy, but it's not booking out completely. So you might see like 75, 80, 85% occupancy in your market. If that's the case, then the last man standing strategy is a risky strategy because you actually do run the risk of being empty. And if you're managing for owners, that owner is not going to be happy when their home is empty in the high season, right? So in those situations, it makes sense to have some level of protection. And so I think for those markets, firm is a good policy because it's only going to hurt you in that 2-week window where you're like between 14 and 30 days out. When you're more than 30 days out, people can still cancel for free. So it's not really going to hurt you early in the booking window, because your booking window for the high season is starting like 6 months out, 8 months out, maybe even a year out. So for those markets, firm can be a good choice. Obviously, that also means that you're going to have the firm policy in the low season too. But, the low season, you're not really going to make much money anyway. All right. So, if you're making like $300 or $500 or $400, for your home in January, it's not really going to affect your overall revenue too much. But if you have a 5-bedroom on the beach and you're putting in like $2,000 a night for the summer, and somebody cancels like a 2-week booking, and now you have to set it at $1,000 a night, you're $14,000 out of pocket, right? So I think in those situations, it makes sense to use firm, especially for the larger homes. Like the 1 and 2 beds, you could probably do limited just because people generally don't book those smaller units so far in advance anyway, and they're easier to book last minute at a reasonable price. So I think for those units, you could do limited. Of course, again, there's a lot of nuances involved, but I would say in general, what I see is most of our clients, when they come and join our service, we typically loosen up their minimum nights of their cancellation policies on Airbnb. So we usually loosen them up. So in general, most people I think are too strict. And it's because most people, I think, only focus on those few times where it happened, where somebody cancels, right before the full refund period ends, right before. And then, now you have to rebook at a lower price, and you're really feeling that pain, right? You're really feeling the pain, and you're like, I don't want to experience this anymore. I'm going to put it on strict. I'm going to put it on firm. But on the flip side, the benefit of having a more flexible policy is that you're generally going to get more visibility and you're going to get more bookings, but that you don't really feel that. It's not felt as pain. And so a lot of people make decisions based on these few events that happens where you're feeling the pain, you're getting the angry owner on the line who's like, hey, why are we booking our unit at $1,000 a night? We got $2,000 a night last year, and you have to explain, sorry, the guest canceled, we had to rebook it, yada, yada, yada. I'm sure you've been there. So yeah, that's not fun. It's not fun. So that's what people are trying to prevent. But what they don't know is that they might actually be losing a lot more revenue than they're saving. So hope that makes sense. I hope that this provides you with some guidelines on how to manage your cancellation policies. Again, we have seen a pretty significant impact on bookings when you loosen up your cancellation policy. So here's another thing that you could do. If you have listings that are for some reason not performing well, what you could do, instead of lowering the price, you could also say, hey, let's temporarily put it on a more flexible cancellation policy. Let's just put it on flexible for the next week. But in order to protect your summer next year, just make the prices for the summer next year, just make them higher, or maybe even like just block out your calendar for your highest value dates, right? So like, the holidays, the summer, like let's say you have a bad review. Like these days, like you get a bad review on Airbnb, your visibility just tanks, right? It's really hard to book those units. So what you can do is you just close the calendar for summer and for the holidays, Christmas, New Year, etc. Just for a week, put it on flexible and put your prices like rock bottom for the next week. Don't worry about how much money you're making on those bookings. You just need to get momentum back. So for listings that are not performing, we just did this for one of our clients. He's got a unit that was not booking far out. It was only booking last minute, and it was very annoying. And so what we did is we temporarily lowered the minimum price for the next couple weeks. And we immediately, even though we lowered it from $149 to $139, it spiked a few bookings. And those bookings immediately spiked then a booking for Christmas. So just getting a booking can help you get another booking. So we didn't change the cancellation policy here, but changing the cancellation policy can have a similar effect. So if you make your cancellation policy, let's say flexible, get a couple bookings going, and then you can switch it back to moderate or limited or whatever you had it on. It's all about just making it a little bit more attractive for people to book, getting that extra visibility on the platform, and that could save your listing, right? Because in the end of the day, like a listing that's just not getting bookings or only gets booking very last minute, you could be losing a lot of money, right? So taking a couple of weeks where you're offering that unit at a very, very attractive price with a flexible cancellation policy can really help. Awesome. So I'm already talking for 30 minutes. I'm going to record another episode that we'll publish next week where we'll talk about cancellation policies on different platforms, right? So we covered Airbnb. We're going to talk about booking.com. We're going to talk about Vrbo. We're going to talk about your direct booking website. Should you have the same policy across those channels? Or is there a reason maybe to have a different cancellation policy on the different platforms? All right. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are interested in knowing how much opportunity you have to increase your revenue, then go to freewildfoundry.com/report and you can get a free pricing audit from our team. We'll go through your pricing strategy. We'll look at your listings and we'll pinpoint the biggest opportunities for you. And then if it makes sense for us to work with you, if you're doing at least $1 million in revenue, and we think there's a win-win where it's a positive ROI for you to work with us, meaning that we can increase your revenue by more than what you're paying us. And of course, we take into account the property management fee. So if your property management fee is 25%, then if our fee is, let's say, 3% of your revenue, then we would have to increase your revenue by 12% because you're only receiving 25% of top line revenue, right? So if we think we can do that, we'll let you know, and then we'll offer you to partner with us. So with that said, hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a great week, and we'll be back next week with another Rev Up episode. We'll see you then.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.